I think I'm just about 30 kilometers in to, what is this, day 3 or day 2 of Austria? Feels like an eternity. Um, yeah, for me, this is the last boring country before we get to the more interesting places. So obviously, I didn't want to break the ritual by not starting in the UK and going through Europe to Asia. In hindsight, I would have probably just flown, as it's it's nice to do, to be physical, get some exercise done, do something slightly different. But Europe is dull. People here in Europe, Western Europe, are dull. We can see by the fact that people still believe in so-called democracy, the fact that people, still supplant themselves in this kind of prism, this box where it's like the house, the mortgage, the kids, tick box, ticks box, and then, and then jab them all with drugs that you have no notion of, unless you're an epidemiologist and you've studied this kind of stuff. Not even a doctor is able to define what it is that is embedded into so-called vaccinations. I mean, vaccinations are things that you shouldn't but give animals because you don't care about them, because they don't have the same standing as human beings. The fact that people send off their children after they've birthed them and nursed them for 9 months in their womb to the fucking doctor who works for the pharmaceutical companies who make trillions of dollars and don't pay any tax and, openly and objectively are responsible for the mass murders and deformations and disabilities of hundreds of thousands of children across the world, notably in Africa. And yet people still take their kids to them and let them, inject them with all kinds of substances. It's just very fascinating to me. But you see the origin as to why that is, which I guess is the positive of when you travel to places, you can understand why people act in a certain way. And the real reason is because people are stuck in, like I said, a prison where they don't express themselves because they don't see another environment. So they're a mirror image, a derivative of whatever the state supplants to them. Supplants upon them. They are the news. They are the 9 to 5 daytime TV channels. They are everything other than themselves. That's a very negative introduction, but I know, just keeping in touch rather with how certain things played out in 2020 to 2021. Austria is objectively the worst country in the world in terms of what they did to people in 2021, and I will never forget that. So, and that's, and actually interestingly, so far it's the rudest country. I've been here 2 days and I've been shouted at by people in cars more than anyone in France, Germany and the Netherlands combined. So over nearly 3 weeks in the other countries, I've experienced in 2 days more rudeness from Austrians than all those other countries combined. And actually the politest people were the French, I must say. The most charismatic, but that's to be expected. They have personality. So what was I saying? So it's tempting to try and blitz it to Graz today, but I already booked accommodation in Graz for Thursday and it's Tuesday. I think it's 170 kilometers. It would be possible, I think, even though the weather's supposed to be problematic. It's raining slightly and it's supposed to be a bit stormy later. But I still think I could do 170k. I think it's pretty much after the next... there's an ascent at some point, a slight ascent, but I think after that it's downhill all the way past Austria into Croatia and Hungary, and pretty much all the way to Istanbul as we head towards the sea. It's going to be mostly a downhill run on the routes that I opt to take. So there's that. Oh, one more thing I was going to say, I guess, because it's nice to bring in politics. I've always said, never stop saying this, I've said this for at least several years, that the UK is the cheapest country in the world. London is obviously not the UK, and people that live in London are idiots, because you can actually make substantially more by living outside of London. I'm not talking about commuting into London, I mean just working outside. Taking a net salary loss of 25% will gain you probably 75% when you account for the costs of either living in London or the commuter fees and the slightly higher costs of things, but only slightly. That said though, Europe is an absolute dive. Everyone keeps talking about like cost of living crisis, which is all a scam anyway, to push people into an enslaved system where they rely on a welfare prodigy, i.e., the kind of government cartel, as it were. It also buys the government support, and I don't mean political support, but it buys the government submission. When everyone becomes reliant on the state because they can't afford basic things, then they do whatever it is that the government tell them to do to get their free paycheck, or their food tokens or coupons. That's essentially how the political system works. Realistically, there is no cost of living crisis. It doesn't exist. It's all fake. So if you take net revenues from Shell and British Petroleum and all the major oil refineries in the world and petrol producing companies, they posted their highest profits ever since they began. So over 100 years. Last year, Shell, BP, highest profits ever, 10, 11, 12 billion GBP in pure profit. So there is no cost of living crisis. It doesn't exist. It's all artificially inseminated upon society, like I said, to squeeze people into conformity. That's the aim of the game. That's the agenda. And when you come to Europe, you see it. Like, the UK is so much cheaper for everything than, let's say, Slovenia. Who would have thought a former Yugoslavian country, or Austria, a derivative of a crumbled empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and relatively poor until, its introduction into the European Union, because that's what the European Union does. It's a total scam. The European Union isn't a democratic system. It's a body of unelected individuals that are lobbied into power by corporations that mingle within their fraternal organisations and their sororities and all their secret little clubs in Strasbourg and Brussels and beyond, and they work out how to fuck the system. And the system's already fucked, which is why we're heading to a reset, which has been openly spoken about, openly talked about, because the financial, what's called economics, which is a false idea, doesn't it? It's an oxymoron. It's a paradox. It doesn't make sense. Economics is a term that denotes the idea that it's applicable to every environment. Economics is like an absolute, like a science. It's not. It's a derivative of a number of things, namely the political economy. So at the worst, it should be called, or at the very least rather, political economics, or the study of the political economy. But anyway, if you conform to the standardized belief of economic practices, well, then the system in which we live doesn't make any sense, does it? Because there's been so much debt for so many centuries, but especially in the last, let's say, handful of decades, with the 2008 crash and the scamdemic of 2019, the amount of debt that there is, it can't be repaid. And people are starting to realise that the system is so fake that the only way that they can retain that system is to rebrand it. And to rebrand it, they need to crash the current system as a mechanism by which to introduce people into what their brand is, a new financial system, a new monetary system, but it's essentially just a new brand. So you originally had gold and then silver and then money backed by said things, and then just paper, and now we're going to head to a digital currency format. Whether that's going to be in the same kind of sphere as you've got ones and twos and threes and fours and fives, and they're called the British pound, the US dollar, the Swiss franc, whatever, or if it's going to be so absurd, it's going to be literally people are going to have frog coins or Doge coins or that kind of stuff. Whether it's going to be rebranded as more individualistic to make people believe that they have more financial freedom, when in fact it's just a way of mocking the already stupefied infidels, which are the vast majority of the human species, complete and utter morons. But yeah, so it's funny when I think I made a little video when I was in Belgium, and I saw just like I showed you. So this is one such environment, just all of this. Now the scenery is very nice, but for people that obviously have travelled or have lived in a place where it looks like this, and then they've travelled, you realise that it doesn't matter if your environment is lovely. It doesn't rub off on you unless you can contextualise that, unless you can contrast that rather with another environment. And I've given the example before of loads of people that move to Australia as a form of escapism because they believe that after having a few weeks holiday there, that'll be the best place to live. It's sunny, you can have barbecues in winter, all that kind of stuff. Many of them end up moving back because escapism is only real, holidays are only real if they're contextualised and contrasted with an existing normative life. It's not a holiday if it's every day, is it? So if you live in holiday land, then it really just quickly becomes just a normal life, and therefore you need something else to give you that escape. So, you know, you often find, what I was trying to gateway this with was that, you know, people, you've got these little these pretty communities, and people see it as kind of like a good thing. You know, they see it as, you know, they see the aesthetic, because that's what has rubbed off on people, this kind of materialistic capitalist approach to existence. Is all based on, you know, the kind of consumerism, which is about marketing, which is about branding, which is about the facade and the aesthetic. And that's now everywhere in people's lives. Like, you know, they happily spend money mowing the lawn and, you know, cropping the trees and polishing the lampposts. But the real social problems go untouched, as their 5-year-olds pretend to be men when they're women. Or, you know, they're half the fucking children at school are now identifying as LGBT and will mainly, probably, not mainly, but sizably become probably transgenders. One thing I didn't talk about the other day, I can't remember if I did. When I arrived in Austria, the first two things I saw when I crossed the German border, this isn't exclusive to Austria in any way, by the way, this is everywhere in Germany, this is in most places that conform to a European Union approach or a so-called Western approach. The first human interaction I had was at the gas station, because it was a Sunday and I needed to buy food and everything was closed. It was a man pretending to be a woman. It was a transsexual, full-on op. That was the first Austrian I spoke to. Fucking ridiculous. Second thing, I saw like a family. There's nothing wrong with this, but you know, the idea is that, you know, it's quite clear. The mixing of society has become such a mission. It was like an Indian woman with 2 children. One was like African and one was just Caucasian. And there could be any number of reasons why that is, but I just thought that was quite appropriate, given that they're the first 2 things I saw when crossing the border into a country that brands itself as very kind of like Catholic and Christian, which is all nonsense, of course. Like in Germany, I saw lots of, like, you know, churches and all this kind of stuff, and yet, like I said, they were imprisoning people. If you haven't seen my other vlog, Austria was the only country in the world that forcibly they made people that weren't vaccinated stay in their homes while everyone else was allowed to just do whatever they want, you know, go about their ordinary lives. This was really late during the scam as well. And, you know, the fact that people allow that to happen, people being the majority of the population, goes to show that they're not Christian. They are, in fact, the most totalitarian people, and I find it quite ironic that Adolf Hitler came from here as well. But usually that's the way. Again, it gateways, it links into what I was saying. When you have lots of rural communities, people have no experience of environments outside their own. Like, for the most part, people will be very saturated in this little prison, this little kind of box where everyone knows each other. You know, they do their same routine over and over again. And you know, when it comes to things like, oh, you know, there's a global zombie land pandemic, which is obviously all nonsense, they will buy into it because they probably watched every zombie movie on Netflix that exists, because there's nothing else to do in the fucking winter up here when it's freezing cold aside from ski and watch zombie movies on Netflix. So, you know, it's a bit of a giggle, but yeah, there is a truth to it. So I just find it really interesting to point these things out. There we go. And yeah, like I said, looking forward to getting to. I think I'm going to take the Hungary. So there's 2 routes you can take. One of them is to cut through Maribor. By the way, the price is just going about literally insane. Perfect example. So if you take like a hostel in London on a pre-book, you can get it for like €13 in the centre in London, in like one of the most popular cities in the world, with New York and Paris for visitors. And yet you just go to pretty much anywhere in Europe now. There's some exceptions, like I paid for Graz, I think I paid like €19, €18. But then, like, you'll go to, like I said, places like Slovenia, former Yugoslavia, and it's like 35, or Salzburg, oh my god, like 40, or Munich, as I said, you know, crazy. And this is all a derivative of the European Union. It's like, if you take Montenegro, when they adopted the euro, it went from being a Yugoslavian country, you know, priced similarly to Serbia. The only difference is it has a beautiful coastline, similar to Croatia. And now these are some of the most expensive countries, not just in Europe, in the world, in the space of a decade. And that's the purpose of the European Union. It's bribe money, it's cartel money, it's criminal money. They buy people's support because people are naturally greedy people. People are greedy, always greedy. You throw some money in their face, they'll jab their kids. You throw some money in their face, they'll vote for you. That's essentially how politics works. The European Union is the champion of corruption and just with a greater understanding of how to manipulate people because of all the funding and capital, lobbying potential it has. It throws money at new cultures. It's like it's like bringing a guest to your house or inviting like a foreign affairs commissioner from a country that you desire something from. You're going to gift them things. You're going to get down on your knees and kiss their toes. That's what they do. Invite Romania and Bulgaria and Austria, any country, and they build it up so the infrastructure looks great. Everyone sees what they think in their mind is progression, which is of course racking up infinite debt, and debt always gets paid back. Some way or another, debt always gets called upon. So, yeah, and then eventually what happens? Prices go up. People get pushed out. People can't afford to live. And that's the thing. That's the derivative of you wanting the easy fix, the cheap way to live. The 5, 6, 7 years of economic progress will come crashing back down. Like when you climb a hill on a bicycle, eventually you're going to go back down. What goes up must come down. That's how political economy or any economic practice works. Nothing keeps going up forever. That's the rule of life. So, but of course people are greedy, and now they're seeing it. The prices in Europe are astronomical compared to the UK, I must say, and other places in the world. And eventually it's going to crash. And of course, they bring in mass migration, all this kind of stuff as a mechanism to, well, we won't go into that now. It's already 16 minutes, 42 seconds. So I'll leave the video here. Appropriately, church bell's ringing, exactly 12 o'clock, so probably should get going.